Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Ferdinand Okonicha Ottoh from the University of Lagos, Nigeria. I'm from the Department of Political Science. The topic to speak this morning, exploring the traditional conflict resolution mechanism in the settlement of Fulani Herdsmen and Farmers conflict in Nigeria. Well, this is a very, okay. This is a very topical issue that you read, you hear every day on the newspaper, on the television, the CNN, and so on. But what I intend to do this morning is to provide an analytical framework that will help us to understand the basis for this conflict, and also to give a new dimension, provide a new explanation on how this conflict can be tackled without using the Western model of resolving it. Like you know that Africans have their own tradition, they have a way of dealing with issues. Like the keynote speaker yesterday provided us the framework, understanding the traditional mechanism in the resolution of conflict. So I will start by saying that the conflict between the Fulani Herdsmen and the farmers in Nigeria is not a recent phenomenon. For centuries, the movement of pastoralists from east and west across the Sahel, the semi-arid zone of south of the Saharan Desert, to Nigeria's northeast. As this movement is as old as the pastoral occupation, so also the conflict itself is as old in the savanna belts of West Africa. In the 70s and 80s, there was a serious drought that occurred in the Sahel region that led to the massive movement, migration of this number of pastoralists into the humid zone of West Africa, with resultant incidents of herders and farmers conflicts in the West African region. But in Nigerian history, from 1991 to 2005, 35% of all reported crises in Nigeria were caused by cattle grazing. Having laid this background to this conflict, I will try to explain the conceptual aspects of this presentation. Conflict resolution is based on the principle of intervention to change or facilitate the cause of a conflict. Conflict resolution is a way of parties in conflict interacting with the hope of reducing the scope, intensity, and effects. When we use the word conflict transformation, it's a way of understanding how conflict emerges, evolves within, and brings about changes in the personal, relational, structural, and cultural dimensions, and for developing a creative responses that promotes peaceful change. Conflict transformation gives room for a third-party intervention, mediation, or through legislative and judicial or cohesive approaches Whereas in a more encompassing way, you can say that conflict management is outcome-oriented approach, which aims to identify and bring to the negotiating table leaders of the conflicting parties. It involves the mobilization and utilization of cultural practices, such as hospitality, commensality, reciprocity, and belief system. These cultural instruments are deployed effectively in the settlement of conflicts. In African setting, the government, the traditional rulers, chief priests of deities, religious groups are mobilized in the management of conflict. The African believes that in a conflict that is intractable in nature, the gods must be called upon for supernatural intervention. Our theoretical part to this particular discourse is eco-violence theory, and of course the theory of intractable and constructive confrontation. The eco-violence theory by Homer Dixon seeks to explain the relationship between environmental issues and violent conflicts. The core of this theory is that competition over scarce resources or ecological resources engender conflict. This trend has been aggravated due to impacts of climate change, which has exacerbated ecological scarcity across the world. The theory of intractable conflict and constructive confrontation approach follows a medical model in which destructive conflict processes are linked or likened to diseases or pathological process that adversely affect people, organizations, and societies as a whole. From this perspective, it simply means that diseases can be completely cured or at best limit the symptoms. As in medicine, some pathological processes at times tend to be very resistant to drugs. Because of the pathological nature of Fulani Herdsmen-Farmers conflict, the pathological medical model helped us in understanding or diagnosing the root causes of this conflict. We begin with the preparation of conflict map, which is by identifying the parties in the conflict, along with their interests and positions. It also helps us to understand the role of elders in the communities who understand the history of these Fulani Herdsmen in the various communities. That is the Fulani migration history and how they have been living over the years. Now, from this theoretical background, this is the trend. This is the main cause of the conflict. You can see the movement of the cattle. You can see this small boy, who is the cattle rearer here. Now, what they do, at night, these boys will lead these cattle to the farms, and they will damage the farms and indeed attack the farmers. Then in the afternoon, when the adults will come, the farmers will attack the adults, and that is what ignites the conflict as we normally hear or read on the newspapers. Naturally, the occupation of this nature, these boys are supposed to be guided by the parents, but we see it that they don't allow them, they just allow them to go on their own. There are so many causes, but essentially the damage to crops, the scarcity to competition for land, the government giving land to private individuals, And the grazing land has been taken over the years. And this has been a major problem in the north, especially those states that you can see in the map. These are the critical points. Adamawa State, Taraba State, Plateau State, Benue State, Nasarawa State. These are the major conflict zones. Now, because of lack of grazing land, the farmers and the cattle, the herdsmen, they now begin to go into competition on acquiring the small land that is available. We also identify some of the immediate causes. You can see that the intra-class struggle, the herdsmen who are Muslims, the farmers who are Christians on one side. This struggle has actually led to the whole number of issues. The government, not able to resolve the issue because of their interest, in some of these issues. Politicians using them, to get support. The politicians who are Muslims will want to use the herdsmen, the farmers who are Christians, and so on and so forth. Then also, we see that the court, the police, as these two people claim, the Hausa Fulani herdsmen and the farmers, they claim that the police and the court are biased already. So they don't have faith in their adjudication. And that also leads us to the main issue of our discussion this morning. I know that I've been giving warning. Please allow me to just make my points here. The traditional aspect of conflict resolution is what we first be of interest. You can see in Africa, this is the way people will gather in the palace of the king to resolve some issues. And I am suggesting that if we can go back to this traditional setting, these institutions, it will go a long way in resolving some of these issues without necessarily going to court. The court processes at times help to elongate this conflict. You can see here, in the east, in the eastern part of Nigeria, they have an oracle called Arochukwu. Very powerful oracle that when a crime is committed and the person denies that he did not commit the crime, and you go to this shrine, for instance, and you take an oath, that will have very immediate effect, very potent effect on that person. And if we resort to this kind of approach, it will go a long way in minimizing the conflicts in Africa. You can see they're just moving this procession to the shrine. Then again, oath-taking is a very serious thing in Africa, and in Nigeria in particular. So we don't joke with oath-taking. Here, this is where the conflict will be resolved. You can see this man and this person holding this glass. The moment they cut this thing, it shows that the matter has been resolved, and nobody should go back to that same issue again. That is, you can see here, this is a boundary. Maybe if we adopt this approach, bringing the Fulani Herdsmen and bringing the farmers together, at the day of settlement, they will all converge at a point and now take a decision that on no account should they attack each other again. That is the strength of the traditional institution in resolving conflict. Because of the lack of legitimacy of government in handling some of these issues, it is important for us to look at this approach as a major departure in modern diplomacy. However, we can still combine both the traditional mechanisms in resolving this conflict and Western approach in resolving conflict. In other words, if we're able to look at those critical areas that appear to be difficult to manage, to bring the parties together, the traditional institution will be used vis-a-vis the Western institution, especially the court. Our own major problem is that the people have lost hope and confidence in the Western institutions. Because of the protracted nature, lawyers have a way of delaying cases, and that will also impact on the kind of settlement that will come at the end. Ladies and gentlemen, there are some weaknesses in this type of approach, but I will mention one. In Nigeria today, traditional institutions have been involved in partisan politics. Naturally, they are supposed to be non-partisan. They are supposed to be adversary body to the government. But because the government uses them to achieve their aim. So they are no longer playing the role they are supposed to be playing. That is why this approach may be very difficult. And again, because of abuse of power, the traditional institution may abuse the power given to them, and of course, abusing the human rights and so on and so forth. The African Union, I'm almost done. The African Union recognizes this approach, and that was why they now set up what we call the Panel of the Wise as part of the peace architecture in African Union. Ladies and gentlemen, this may not have been the all we can hear this morning, but I have made a very conscious attempt to provide a new path in understanding and also a way to resolve an intractable conflict such as the Fulani and farmers conflict in Nigeria. Thank you very much.